Welcome to another episode of the Heron Outlet, which this one is sure to be a doozy. He is Austin Robillard. She is Alex Finley. I am Ian Hest. And guys, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. Phil Neville, now fined by the club for comments that were made at the end of the 1-0 loss to New York Red Bulls, seemingly just had enough. And we alluded to it for week after week after week here on the pod. Just sort of seemed like he had enough now with the refs and felt sort of like his team was playing not just another team, but playing two in a single game. And he said that he felt his team was being cheated. He said that multiple times. He pointed to each of the instances in the past 3 games. I'll just go first. I think that everything he said is entirely accurate and entirely fair, but also you can't talk like that. And so he's been fined for that. The league has not been very happy with that, with those comments. So let's just start right with brass tacks. Do you feel that what he said was accurate, and was that a fair criticism, or should he not have gone that far?
Yeah, but just before I start, he's fined by the league, not by the club, I believe. I think you said club, he was fined by the league. And everything that Phil Neville said, especially from an Inter Miami perspective, having watched every single match live, having watched every single one of those instances time and time again, he's right in saying this, and he's not only right just from my perspective or from his perspective. These things were called back and proven by not only Inter Miami, but the league themselves. They called themselves out on these calls with Monday morning emails saying that, hey, look, the LGP handball probably shouldn't have been a handball, and they apologized for it in an email. Oh, sorry, we missed 2 Robbie Robinson penalty calls, and then we also missed the Carranza foul. That wasn't actually a foul, so you should have had an equalizer even without those 2 penalty decisions. That was our mistake, my bad. And then with this whole Gonzalo Higuain offside thing, clearly not offside, got allowed, disallowed, disallowed. How many times you have to go back and forth with a video assistant referee is beyond me. And I think that he's right to criticize that in it of itself, because it is a very expensive review system, and they've invested money into it as a league, and they need to use it properly, and they haven't. And I think a lot of what he touched on too in that press conference that has gone now viral, I guess, was that he thought the referee in the match did a great job refereeing the game. And I thought so too, after having my own rewatch. And he said that the referee, she was let down by this one decision that altered the game and turned it around on his head. And I think that that's where he's kind of leading towards this, because VAR is the one that's making these decisions at the end of the day. They went back on the LGP handball. They're the ones that looked at it and let it stand. You can review for penalties if the referee does miss something. They were not reviewed in Portland. And then VAR is also the one that looked at the foul after the referee did call it. However, VAR looked at it and confirmed it as well. So there's, on all these occasions, I think it's valid with how Phil Neville is feeling. I think that he is valid to feel these ways, and he's gotten proven validity through the league. And I know that what he said was a little much. He not only said that they were being cheated and or mistreated, but he also had a call for action to this with an investigation. He was calling for an investigation to how refereeing against Inter Miami has gone throughout the course of the season. And I'm sure that that's not going to happen with how we've seen the league react, but I think that he has fair points here. And this is despite Miami's cheating scandal in 2020, the 5 DPs, the Matuidi thing. All of that is history at this point, and it doesn't have anything to do, and it should play no factor in what's going on in 2021. Remember, Phil Neville wasn't here in 2020. So for anybody, including one person on ESPN, who's saying that Phil Neville should not be the man.
We'll get into it.
I just, it's beyond me that is becoming a a retaliation to what's been going on. It's beyond me, and it infuriates me. It makes no sense because everything needs to be taken in context at face value here. And for these decisions to be wrong, and for the league to come back and say that they were wrong, and then have people say, "Oh, suck it up," no, that's nine. That could be 9 points lost in a playoff battle where you're. Anyway, I'll stop here.
If MLS want to become a league of choice, they're going to have to get this refereeing situation under control. There's been multiple teams this season that have had controversies like this, and Inter Miami is not the first. I'm not saying that Inter Miami's been specifically targeted, but you know, with Miami being as big of a club that they want to be, the high profile names, David Beckham, and breaking some MLS rules last year. I'm not saying that it's a conspiracy, but the league and the rest may be a little bit extra harder on Inter Miami because they think that, oh, Miami wants to get away with everything. We'll teach them a lesson by, just overlooking some calls or maybe not being as consistent as we would with a Seattle Sounders or an LA Galaxy or whatever big club, the Portland Timbers or what have you. So Neville was absolutely in the right to be upset. Like Austin said, some of those calls could have gotten Inter Miami points, and they would have been sitting closer to a playoff spot. Should those penalties would have been called? Should that LGP handball in Atlanta, which was it was just as absurd because he was tucking his arm in, and on Twitter Atlanta fans were saying, oh, clearly the ball touched his hand, therefore handball, duh. But that's not how it goes. It has to be there, the intent has to be there. But Neville was, like I said, he was in the right to be upset over that. It was cheated. I don't think it was nefarious, but a lot of the times these refs, they turn a blind eye to some questionable calls, and they don't get it right consistently. And with Inter Miami, it happened to be in 3 straight games. So absolutely, Inter Miami have every right to be upset. I wrote in my recent Lemon City Live piece that it's just it's just a culmination of several incidents that have happened this year. So Neville being the head coach, of course he's going to defend his team, but MLS have had just a refereeing problem for the longest time, and I think Neville got fed up, and he vented his frustrations to the media, and now it's turned into this giant thing about does Neville deserve to be here, nepotism, yada yada yada, and it's snowballed into something that's probably not going to die down anytime soon.
So I want to get into, because right before we started this podcast, the Professional Soccer Refereeing Association, it's a labor union representing more than 200 officials, according to the Miami Herald, in North America, said that they were quote unquote outraged. And we're going to have a little of a reading time with Ian here. They say, according to the Herald, the PSRA is very disappointed both in Mr. Neville's comments and behavior, which we find to be unprofessional and reprehensible, and also in the outcome from Commissioner Garber. This is according to Steve Taylor, the executive director of the PSRA, who spoke with the Herald. He said in other cases, there were more severe punishment, citing a 5-match ban on Sir Alex Ferguson in 2011 for saying Martin Atkinson should have been a fair referee. Quote, there's lots of cases where there are suspensions for far less than using the word cheat on a variation of that word 8 times in an 11-minute press conference, Taylor said. Our officials do not cheat, and no one was robbed. We come to work every day and do not care who wins or loses. To suggest otherwise is reprehensible in our opinion and potentially criminal as a matter of fact. So first off, whoa. For me, that's raising this, that's escalating this even further. To me, that's saying far worse than what Phil said. And they clearly have a feeling here that what Phil said and repeated is not okay under any circumstance. I'll be honest, from my point of view, that was a lot more aggressive and a lot more unprofessional and a lot more reprehensible. They're supposed to be the judges in this case. They're not supposed to give their opinion on it. And, you can dislike the ref all you want, but that to me is just a little too aggressive for my taste.
Well, I kind of see the approach that they're taking here. They have to, much like Phil Neville is trying to protect his football club. They're trying to protect their workers in the union, and I guess I understand it. And yes, I do think it is a little extreme for what they're calling for and what they're saying. Um, but at the end of the
But to
day,
call it
it's
a
not only
crime, they said that they said that he
yeah,
committed a
no,
crime. I mean, wow,
which is
like what?
which is a lot, and it not only the reason why Phil Neville is quote unquote committing a crime is not because Phil Neville feels some sort of way. It's because the league that they are officiating in has given them proof and has given them understanding that they got decisions wrong that were unfavorable for Inter Miami. That's where it blows my mind on how this story has turned. The league themselves, and I don't know if they said anything in the Red Bull New York match, but in the Portland match and in the Atlanta match, there were emails sent to Inter Miami to quote Phil Neville saying that they got those decisions wrong. 4 in a span of 2 games. That's where this goes beyond me. And that's where I lose sight of how people can't see why Phil Neville feels some sort of way. They have admitted to getting things wrong. And now I have to think, look, maybe the Pro Refereeing Association should be looking at MLS and saying, hey, back us. Don't give them proof to say that, hey, we got these or something. I mean, there's got to be some miscommunication there at some point. And now you look at the Red Bull New York match and you look at the offside call for Gonzalo Higuain. I'm not sure if the league had said anything about that call, and I'm sure they didn't after the press conference that followed the game immediately. But Inter Miami gave media members access to why they are saying that they can prove Gonzalo Higuain was onside. I know there were a couple of other Twitter accounts that do soccer photographs or something saying that he was all onside. There's all this kind of stuff to prove that Gonzalo Higuain is onside, and you can see that he is onside. Even if it is a small margin, he's onside, and VAR is supposed to eliminate those kind of discrepancies. So for pro referees and that whole entire statement about saying basically Phil Neville is a criminal, I mean, for calling against cheating is mind blowing. I think it's taken a little bit too far at that point, but I have no other words other than that Phil Neville.
For
I
me,
believe Phil Neville's valid.
That takes it past what any of this was. That was honestly, like your point, that was criticism. Maybe that was too far of criticism, but like you said, it was
Sure.
fair criticism to a certain extent. Maybe he talked too much about it, but to I guess exacerbate the issue, that's the part where I go, well, wait a minute. Maybe these calls about the refs don't like Inter Miami, maybe they're even leading credence to this. Maybe they're even showing how to call it a crime seems to me to feel like you don't like these people. So when you're not getting along, I don't think it's fair to go, well, wait a minute, do you have a bias here? Because we all know in journalism school how we're supposed to turn off a bias and what we're supposed to go with. Does that not tell you, wait a minute, you might have a bias here that hasn't been discussed enough and now it's coming above the water, Alex?
I think that this situation it's going to snowball into something completely different because the media has picked up on it, and ever since Miami's inception, we've all been there. There's just been mountains of anti Miami bias, and this is me being completely objective. Even before they were called Inter Miami, it was just, excuse me, a struggle to get this franchise off the ground, with the stadium and getting the multiple investors. When did David Beckham announce his bid in 2014, and it took until 2020, and that it shows you it was just a slog the entire way. And national media, they were of zero help in regard to that. It seemed like they didn't want this franchise to happen. Even local media, they were very skeptical. So bringing this back to the refereeing decision, I think it's like you said, Ian. I do think that the refs coming out and saying this is criminal. it sound you know, like at the end of the day, this is just soccer. I don't know why they're accusing him of some sort of criminality. It sounds absurd, you know, like, you know, relax. We're just playing a game with you know, you're kicking a ball in the middle between two sticks. I don't understand why they would use that sort of usage, but this is gonna snowball, I'm afraid. And you know, with these comments that, you know, we read the Michelle Kaufman article from Miami Herald, it, yeah, I'm afraid that, you know, this is gonna snowball. And you know, with pro referees, every team have had gripes with them, and the refereeing in MLS can get a little shifty sometimes in terms of just the inconsistency. Some penalties aren't penalties, and whatnot. But you know, this sets a terrible like level going forward, because you know, compare it, you know, what Inter Miami's gone through with, you know, the non-penalty call in Atlanta, and you know, the goal that was disallowed from Carranza, and the Robbie Robinson penalties that should have been called. You know, those were points that Inter Miami could have gotten. So I understand Neville's frustration. When you're frustrated, you don't think, you see red and you just sprout out, you know, your innermost thoughts. So you know, Neville probably could have used better words, but he was just fuming in that post-match conference. But for these refs to come back and say this was criminal, that those are words that escalate a situation to something that it shouldn't be. And you know, it's this is gonna get very messy, in my opinion. Yeah, it's gonna get messy at the end of this.
And Michelle Kaufman's article is wonderful. Check it out at the Herald. That was just a short portion of that. But Austin, you know, I know that I'm sort of like this MLS nerd that's been, you know, before Inter Miami ever existed. I almost even wore my Miami Fusion jersey during this podcast this week, simply to say that, because I made a lot of phone calls and a lot of text messages around the league this week, and nearly universally it was bad teams complain like this. That just goes to show they're a bad team. Quit complaining. And I guess I was a little confused about that answer, that it was so unanimous in how they were reacting to it, because I get what they're saying, and bad teams do complain like this, and bad teams do have this issue, but bad teams also aren't still in the mix when the league is able to point to each one of these little instances that dictate results of games. You made a good point. They're 8 points out of contention, and someone, I think on Twitter, had said to you, well, it's only 3 points that they would have lost. That's the whole that's the difference between being 2 games out and 4 games out right now. And so I don't think that it's too difficult to see how, yes, these little instances, yes, they can't score. Yes, I think they probably have the fewest goals scored in the league, or close to it. We've talked all about the offense all season long. But I guess I struggle here in saying maybe they're not a good team, but maybe they're not a bad team. And when every call goes against you, it winds up creating a situation where they're considered a bad team when they're not. They're right in the middle, and they're not getting that fair shake. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think that you're wrong. I think that where my difference lies in perspective on how Inter Miami do as a team is that they haven't shown me personally enough that they would do anything if they did get to the playoffs, right? Like, I don't know how far they would go.
But
Obviously,
7 teams are going to make the playoffs. Only
that's
one of them is going to win the Eastern Conference. So
right.
I
That
don't
was
really
my
like that argument.
that was my next point, is that half of the teams in the Eastern Conference make the playoffs. Not all of them are going to be good teams. So no, if this is a 4 or 5 team playoff, it's a lot different. I mean, you look at last year, 10 teams made the playoff, and Inter Miami were there, and like, you know, that's how the league is designed. Exactly, that's how the league is designed. And sure, in a regular scenario, say if this was a league like the NFL, where, you know, I guess they just expanded their playoffs, but if it was a shorter playoff format, then yeah, maybe Inter Miami haven't proven to be a playoff team. But when you give half the people a chance to make the playoffs, and it's in everybody's reach for the majority of the season, you can't have calls like this that ruin somebody's playoff chances. And I don't think it's happened to other teams in the Eastern Conference like it has into Miami, especially the ones that are at 7, 8, 9, 10 spots, like Atlanta, Columbus, Toronto, Cincinnati, all those teams.
The other part that you need to understand in that too is you could have said, oh, well, that's just 1 point that they lost if they would have drawn New York Red Bulls. But that's also 2 points that Red Bulls gained. That's also 2 points that Atlanta gained in this fight. And you lose that contextual understanding. It hurts more when it happens against those teams.
And another thing that I mentioned too is that goals change games, right? If the penalty is not scored and maybe Nick Morrisman makes a save, what does that do for the momentum past the 78-minute mark where Josef Martinez got his goal? What does it do in the Portland match? If Robbie Robinson gets a penalty and then he gets another one, if they score just one of those, the entire game is changed on its head, and Carranza gets an equalizer, and you don't know what can happen. And then you look at the Red Bulls game, and that was in the 60 or so minute. It was, there were still at least 30 minutes to go after Higuain scored. I mean, goals change games. The entire outcome of every single game is put into question now because of these refereeing decisions, and that's what you have to look at. And you made a great point, Ian. It's not just, points lost for Miami, it's points gained for contenders that are playing right next to Inter Miami in the Eastern Conference table looking to make the playoffs. And it's not our fault. It's not our fault that the MLS decides to let half of their teams make the playoffs from each conference. You're going to have bad teams.
The MLS thing on you real fast.
Sorry.
That's the inside joke. No, I gotta.
Yeah, that was It's tough. It's tough. They need to change something so it'll be easier to talk. No, when you give half the teams a chance to make the playoffs, if you look at let's say Montreal, for example, who's in the 6th spot. Am I going to go on and say Montreal is a good team right now? They're not a great team. They're not a good team. They're a half decent team. If I go in the West, I'm going to say the same thing about some of those 7, 6, and 5 teams. I'm going to say that for a lot of teams that are going to make the playoffs for MLS. But I think that it's now coming down to this Inter Miami bias where you look at 2020 and the cheating scandal that happened, and everybody, is dwelling on that and looking at that and frowned upon on that. And sure, that's fine, but we're not there anymore. Those things aren't happening anymore. The players that were in question are not here anymore other than Matuidi, and we lifted his designation as a player. I mean, everything was fixed, right? Pellegrini's gone. Andres Reyes is gone. Matuidi is being compensated and on the record book like he should be. All of this, it's all happening in the right way. Miami has not done anything wrong in 2021. Phil Neville has not done anything wrong in 2021, other than, I guess, if you want to say this, but they're playing by the books now, and the playoff race is happening now. Nothing else in the past should be coming into question, and I think that is where the biggest issue is for me, other than the fact that the league is literally admitting to mistakes, but people don't see that.
I think the scary thing is I believe in Neville's post-match conference he said that the players now have a distrust of the referees, which is huge. If you're a player and you don't think calls are going to go your way, well, you're not going to play to your fullest potential because of any instance you could go down the penalty box and you won't get a call. That's the point. We're not going to make the playoffs this way. It feels as if there's instead of 11 guys on the pitch, there's 12 against you. So they're not going to play as hard, and then that in turn affects Inter Miami and their performance, and that in turn affects Phil Neville and his tactical setup, and then it's just a domino effect of poor decisions. They go their way, and then they don't play well, and then Neville is on the hot seat, and then they lose, and they slip out of playoff contention. So it's just a slippery slope, and I want to touch on Austin's point about this anti-Neville bias. I've said multiple times, going into this year, he wasn't my first choice coach, but I did my research, and he's a good enough coach from what I've seen from the England's women's team that he could have done damage in the league had he had the right setup. But with the roster, how that's constructed, and it's a giant thing. But I do think that like Diego Alonso last year, Neville was sort of given a short stick, and we saw Chris Henderson give an interview, was it yesterday or the day before, at Drive Pink, saying, there's 3 or 4 guys that we can bring in that shifts the tide of a team, and that can change them from, floundering in the Eastern Conference basement to MLS Cup contenders. And next year, we will see that with Inter Miami. Inter Miami hired Chris Henderson as probably, one of the best roster builders, in the league, as director of football. So as far as that goes, Inter Miami's in good hands, and we saw what Fort Lauderdale can do, and they can bring up some of those guys. And we spoke to Darren Powell, and he touched on that, and just this referee controversy and not make the playoffs. Yeah, I don't want to call it an anti-Miami bias, but we all live in South Florida. We see it with other sports teams, with the Miami Heat, Dolphins, the national media. Miami Hurricanes, they never give Miami teams their props because it's Miami, a flashy city. Oh, they're all valid and shallow and whatnot. So it's just a culmination of all of those things, and it's unfortunate because this just adds another distraction to Miami's playoff race if they're going to make it. Just these extra comments by the refs and the national media and the MLS media, it just piles on after a while, and then the players get affected, and like I said, it's a domino effect, and they don't play well, and then they continue to slip. And yeah, it's just all around. It's just getting messy. It's getting really messy.
Is that a messy pun or no?
I wish Messi could be. We could use Messi.
Now we're gonna get all the page views of Messi to Miami, right? It could be Messi in Miami. Anyway, guys, I think that's enough ref talk. I think none of us really want to have ref talk. The other major point of contention is the designated players, and Phil has talked time and time again, even before these matches, saying, hey, these are the guys that need to lead us. 0 goals in 3 games. Higuain has probably had his worst stretch of form as an Inter Miami fan. I don't know if that's being a little too unfair to him, but hasn't really. It looks like this season is sort of wearing him down. Matuidi gets subbed in the 66th against New York Red Bulls. Pizarro's played okay, still also got subbed out in that Portland game, and has, really created, I guess, as much offense as Inter Miami has looked in these past couple games, but it still hasn't manifested itself in goals. So they haven't scored. So I put this poll on Twitter like a couple weeks ago, or maybe a little more than a week ago, that how many of the I stole it from a Toronto FC reporter, Dwayne Rollins is a good friend, and said how many of Inter Miami's designated players will be back next year, 1, 2, or 3. And overwhelmingly, the people that answered it said 1, but overwhelmingly, the people who responded to it said, why is there not an option that says 0? And I felt like that was really telling about how people feel about what is going on. So when Phil is so aggressive about saying, hey, this playoff push is going to come down to the performance of the designated players, and it seems not to be working, and it seems to be that the designated players are not performing, how much of this is just the end of the road for these 3 in this situation?
Plenty. I personally think that I've talked about it all year. They don't work well together at all. Was regressing even since leaving Juventus. Even when he was at Juventus fans were not too big of a fans of him. In his later stages of his Juventus career, Gonzalo Higuain, while he's got 10 goals, 5 assists on the year. He seems like a guy who is on vacation. He's talked about MLS. He thought it was going to be a walk in the park. He didn't really take it seriously. This year he did step up his game, but I do feel like he does have 1 foot out the door already. He already said past 2022 he doesn't know what he's going to do. So last year could very well be his last year of as a professional soccer player. Rodolfo Pizarro, I've written about him multiple times. He is just a traffic cone at times. Yes, he scored, pivotal goals at important moments, but throughout the season, he's been a ghost. Even last year, while he did play a bit better, he did not live up to his, $12 million price tag, which was, if you compare it to some of the other DPs in the league, it's up there, and he doesn't produce nearly as much as some of those guys. So, as a whole, these 3 don't work well together. I do firmly believe that if Chris Henderson, Inter Miami, were to bring in, quality players in those positions, this team would look very differently. Even when, let's say, you swap out Pizarro for Federico, you see the difference in what a true 10 does versus what Pizarro does. And I know we've discussed Pizarro maybe dropping back a bit deep, but the team didn't pay him $12 million to play as a box to box midfielder, although he can do that job. Just all together, this roster is really lopsided. There's guys on TAM that aren't producing. We talked about Julian Carranza, who's on a bucket load of money, and he scored once, which was last year. Like, was it two goals? And he's never scored since.
2
He
goals
hasn't
in the
scored
same
since.
game,
So
and he made sure that everybody knew about it, and then never scored again.
he's never scored again. So it's fixable, and the club has a guy in Chris Henderson who can fix it, but every time I watch Inter Miami games, there's just something to nitpick at, and I've tweeted about it on my tactical account about just how uneven it looks sometimes with these guys playing together because they're all on three separate different pages, and you see a guy like Robbie Robinson who has loads of potential. Even then, he's forced into playing as a back to goal number 9 because Higuain needs to drop deep because Pizarro's not creating enough and Gonzalo's the only creator on the team. So it shifts everyone out of their natural positions just to accommodate players that Inter Miami shouldn't have gotten in the first place. So it's basically beating a dead horse at this point. And I've talked about just Inter Miami, although it would be nice for them to make the playoffs. Just the season is a wash at this point. We know the sanctions are coming. We know some of these guys won't be here next season. I would switch my focus towards 2022 because there's a lot of upside in that regard with, Fort Lauderdale CF, and we saw Mabika, Gadiri. Even then, he's got some Fort Lauderdale. He had some playing time with them earlier this season. Ascona, he's getting there. Felipe Valencia. There's just tons of talent there, but yeah, yeah, it's just messy. Not literal messy, but it's a messy situation. And
Well, Alex, can I
I'd
just
agree.
jump in on that? Can I just jump in on
Yeah,
that? When Phil's talking
yeah,
about next year, there's going to be 6 guys that are coming up that Ascona and Valencia, they don't count in that regard. Josh Penn doesn't
yeah.
even count in that regard. That these are going to be the guys that we're talking about next year. How much of that factors into the decision of, do you keep a Gonzalo Higuain as a mentor figure? Maybe he moves to the bench, or any of these guys. There was talk about Figal moving on at the end of the year. We did a video on Tigres and everything with that. It's clear that there's going to be so much roster turnover, but how much of this is predicated on, will those young guys come through, and how much of the old guard do you want to keep?
Well, I don't think Inter Miami have a choice. They have to play the kids at this point because they're going to be short. Was it the transfer allocation money, just allocation money in general? Guys like Mabika, Josh Penn, George Acosta, they're going to, although Mabika is not signed to a first team contract yet, but I'm pretty sure he will. He will. But George Acosta, Josh Penn, at Ascona, they're going to get significant minutes next season just solely because of the sanctions. And while I trust Chris Henderson to make that balance of older head locker room guys versus the younger ones. There's this season, this roster is very old. Matuidi's 34, Ryan Shawcross, he's 33, 34, Higuain, he's 33. Yeah, Leardom, he's 31. There's a lot of guys. Federico Higuain, he's 35. There's a lot of older guys on this roster, and yeah, there's going to need to be a fine balance between the younger players and the older ones as well. But yeah, it's just going to be an incredibly critical off season for Miami. There's a lot of things to do, a lot of guys to move on from the club, a lot of guys to bring in. So um yeah, I think it'll have to be a balance.
I want to say first, before I get into the question I want to pose to you guys, Paul McDonough and Chris Henderson have completely different job tasks, right? Paul McDonough was to come in here and make a splash. Paul McDonough came here to make the big signings, make the big moves, get the star players, and he didn't deliver on those signings. And now, with what he did and how badly he constructed the roster and got and cheated, you move on to Chris Henderson, who's now his job is to not necessarily make these big splash signings, is to maximize value. It's to develop through the academy in Fort Lauderdale CF and bring up these young guys that maybe that wasn't the initial goal of the club. I know it was always in the cards, but it wasn't like Ronaldo and Messi weren't talked about, back then. And now you think about it, and I don't think that you've even heard of lick of that, but from the Jorge Mas or Beckhams of the world in the last year. And that goes all the way back to the press conference introducing Phil Neville. The entire 2 hours that they sat down and spoke, Henderson, Neville, Beckham, Moss, it was all about academy, kids, bringing them up, having them develop. We want to be proud of something. We want their homegrowns to be good and bring them up. And the entire show, the entire tone of the club shifted. It fully did, and now it has to because of the sanctions.
Don't forget that Hendo's loved throughout the league. Hendo is a loved figure throughout the league. It's not just here. Yeah, so that plays a huge role.
And he's proven Seattle, if not a dynasty at the time that he was there, is the closest thing to a sports dynasty that you get to. I mean, he was right on the brink of a dynasty with the Seattle Sounders, and he did a phenomenal job. If they would have beat Columbus Crew last year, I believe that was the final, Columbus in Seattle. I mean, then you look at it as a real, somewhat dynasty of a club between that 5 or 6 year period where they made 3 MLS Cup finals. So you look at Chris Henderson, you say, yes, this is probably the man for the job. We have to put the trust in you. But they need to also get on the same level in terms of what they're doing, and I think that they have done that. I don't think it was like that when Paul McDonough and Diego Alonso were here, and I think that there's more communication within the club now, which is a good thing. Now, the question I want to pose back to you guys, Ian, you put out that poll about the DPs returning. How many do you want, or how many do you think you want, or how many do you think will actually be there? Well, my question for you guys is, how in the world, other than retiring, are they going to get Matuidi and Gonzalo Higuain to go? Right? How do you get rid of Gonzalo Higuain on the last year of his deal? How do you get rid of Blaise Matuidi on the last year of his deal? Now, Pizarro's a little bit different because I think that there's always going to be interest from Liga MX, but I'm curious to how you see it possible that they can get rid of these players in a way past during 2022, not past 2022, because that's when their deal expires. How do they get rid of them in a way, even if it's for X amount of dollars?
First off, I don't think that Pizarro is difficult to get rid of. With all due respect to him, I think that you're gonna find a Liga MX team or an Argentinian team, even if he can't get to Europe. I think that
Pizarro sells T-shirts. Right. Pizarro sells T-shirts and brings eyes. 100%.
I think it's easy to get Pizarro off the books. The other factor in that is now you have to look at the other two. I don't think that Matuidi is as difficult because he's not he's making 20% of what Higuain is making. And so I think it's a little easier if he's truly set on 2022 is going to be his last year playing soccer. Okay, fine, then there's going to be a team in Dubai or China or something like that maybe I know that I'm like throwing things out that don't exist right now, so don't quote me on that. But I don't think that it's difficult to say that, oh, hey, don't you want to just end your career somewhere there and get that off the books? Just simply because the salary, he's going to make more money over there than he's going to making $1 million and change over here. I think Higuain's the tough one, but I also think Higuain's the most valuable one. And I think he's the one of the three that's played the best. So he commands one of the highest salaries. I'm not even sure if he's the highest paid player in all of MLS. He might be. But I think that Higuain is the one where, okay, maybe we don't move this. Maybe we keep it, which is why when I talk about bringing up the kids, is he going to be more of a role where he's in charge of mentoring these kids so that when he's gone, they're able to have had that wisdom and be able to play that way.
Let me just talk about Gonzalo Higuain as a mentor, because on the pitch, I don't see it. I don't know what happens behind closed doors or outside of the lines.
He's demanding, but we all have that coworker that's demanding of us.
True, but let me point to one thing that I saw in the Red Bulls game. he made a perfect pass I think it was around the 15th minute. He made a perfect pass to Robbie Robinson through the center backs.
Yep.
And Robbie Robinson missed a clear chance. And he literally jumped in frustration, threw his arms down, and was fuming. I mean, fuming. And I it's understandable. The frustration is there, but did he have a talk with Robbie Robinson after the game? That's what I have to hope for. Did he? I mean, you didn't see any, like reconciliation during the game, but after the game, you would hope that there was something there. And we had the locker room talk last week on the show and all of that kind of stuff. But that's where I don't think Gonzalo Higuain in 2022 with the sanctions is a benefit to this team in any way. I think the only thing he does personally, and I'm not saying that Gonzalo Higuain is not a good player and he's not provided for Inter Miami this season, because I don't think that that's true. I think he has done a lot of good and been one of the best players on the year. Just by looking at the stat sheet, it's easy to tell. But going past to 2022 and 2023, where you talk about bringing up the kids and having to have a mentor, I think that Gonzalo Higuain just takes away opportunities for some of these kids to shine. I mean, how many times are we going to see Mitchell Curry on the pitch if Gonzalo Higuain is there, or Hundal, or whoever gets brought up? I think that he takes away opportunity as much as he might be a great mentor, a great person to play around in practice and having push other young players during training. I mean, that could be a huge factor that I'm completely missing out on, but I don't personally see it, so I don't know, so I can't speak on it. But on the field, not only does it take away opportunity, but when he's playing next to a young guy in Robbie Robinson, who is just in his second professional season, it doesn't look like he's benefiting him in any aspect of his game.
Yeah, especially when, Gonzalo's tendency to drop deep forces Robbie out of position, and that's as a pure back to goal number 9, which doesn't work for him. We've seen Robbie play as a out and out winger, and that's hands down his best position. He uses his physicality, speed just to burn defenders with his pace, and so when Gonzalo drops deep, because like I said, no creative presence, he's literally the only false 10 we've got the team has on the field. Robbie's forced to play as a 9, and it's a domino effect of tactical just miscommunication. And while people are critical of Neville, and rightfully so, they should be doing better. He was given such a bad hand with these players. It's like trying to fit square pegs in round holes. It doesn't work. We've seen the 4-2-3-1, we've seen the back three, we've seen the 4-3-3. Just whatever happens, they've not been able to get a run of consistency going offensively. And with these DPs, all three of them, if it's possible, I would just get rid of. I'd get rid of them because they don't fit what Inter Miami's current philosophy is, which is to play the kids. And what Chris Henderson said when he was introduced, he wants players to play above their wage level. You look at a guy like Breck Shea, who arguably with the amount of just his locker room presence, the effort he gives on the pitch, arguably he should be getting paid more, but he's playing above his pay grade.
He was signed to Fort Lauderdale,
yes.
Alex. He was signed to Fort Lauderdale, and now he's the most loved person that was so amazing to me.
I bet Chris Henderson loves him because those are the exact type of players that Henderson wants on an MLS roster. You see it with Seattle. How much does their backline combined make? Surely less than what Gonzalo Higuain earns in a year. So for people worrying about, are we going to find quality players when these sanctions hit? Yes, the team will be able to find quality players within MLS, outside MLS. You just need to be smart with your money.
So that leads me to earlier this week, MLS Soccer came out with their 22 under 22 list, which I thought was really something that I at least personally look at every single year. Not a single Inter Miami player or Fort Lauderdale player was involved in that. I think maybe if Robbie had he missed it by 11 months. And I think that maybe if he was there, he would have been involved in that. But Inter Miami didn't have anybody. FC Dallas led the way with 5 players, if I'm remembering right off the bat. And they consistently seem to be churning out those style players. And so Inter Miami has always been, the natural comparison has always been to the LA Galaxy, also because of the David Beckham stuff and everything there, but also because they're this big time club. But I wonder moving forward as we have this play the kids conversation, if they should be looking to what FC Dallas is doing. Ricardo Pepi was the number 1 person on the list. And if we should be having this conversation that maybe they're going to be able to be a more successful club if they follow that model, and they'll make more money because FC Dallas has been tremendous in selling players off and making money off of this. If we should be feeling like that's the model to follow more than the LA Galaxy model is.
I think that that's the model to follow to a certain extent. I don't think that Miami are in the same realm of club. They are not on the same level as FC Dallas in terms of club and their exposure and how big they are. I think that FC Dallas, just because of being in Dallas and being Miami, it's totally different parts of the world or parts of America. Totally different. Everyone has totally different perspectives on what those two clubs are, and their visions are a lot different. You mentioned FC Dallas is moving on those players, right? They're getting rid of them and they're selling them when they hit that peak, which is fine. But I think that Inter Miami are a club that have these amazing aspirations where they might keep them for a couple of those peak years, right? And of course, yes, Ricardo Pepi's there now and he broke out, but he's only 18 years old. So that's the crazy thing. Yes, you need to follow that model, but I think that Inter Miami could keep around some of those guys just because of their I can't find the word that I'm looking for, but they are a big club. That's why. And I think I mentioned, I think it might have been last week or the week before, Philadelphia, Red Bulls New York, who had Tyler Adams and sold them. You look at the Union Academy, who had Mark McKenzie and Brendan Aronson. And there are a lot of academies in MLS that do great things with young talent and homegrown talent and bring them up and sell them off. But that's where I stop Inter Miami. And I say, look, yes, do that. Bring up players through your academy, through your system. But I think that their aspirations are so high that they're going to try and keep them around for as long as possible, because they not only will have the money to do so while the league increases spending over the next, until 2027, but they will be willing to give their homegrown players money if they can produce. So that's the difference for me. I don't think that their idea is to send them off to Europe as soon as possible, as soon as they have that $10 million price tag.
Yeah, and although FC Dallas have a couple of 5 guys in the MLS 22 under 22 list, they're not tearing through the Western Conference, are they? They've got 6 wins on the season and they're on 28 points right now, and I don't even think they're not near the playoff line either. Yeah, they're 10 points
that
under.
brings up a good point that I wanted to ask you about, okay? Because New England Revolution 2 are firmly into the playoffs for USL League One. Toronto is borderline on the cusp, and that's what wanted me to talk about Fort Lauderdale for you, is the fact that it's going to take a bundle. It's going to take everything to break their way now for them to get into the playoffs. Is their success indicative of what Inter Miami's success is going to be? Because basically everything is going to need to break their way here
now. Personally, I think when these Fort Lauderdale guys do come up, I don't want people to think that George Acosta playing is going to be our savior and we're gonna win MLS Cup 3 straight years in a row. No, it doesn't work like that.
Mabika is our savior, though. Let me tell you, that guy balled.
Yeah. We got to touch on that. He had in a phenomenal game, even though they lost the game. But I'm like these Fort Lauderdale guys.
Go ahead, touch on it. You come on.
Okay.
You want to?
Okay, yeah. Mabika had a really good game. That first goal, arguably maybe he could have stuck a foot out, but then again, Leardom didn't do him any favors playing that ball out, and it was just a weird play. But other than that, he was spot on. He didn't miss a single tackle. He won all his headers, obviously. He was composed. He played the ball at the back well. And there was this one instance at the end of the game where I don't know what minute it was, but there was a long ball over the top for Red Bulls, and he went over and boxed the guy out and calmly kicked it back to Nick Marsman, and he just had such a dominant presence in that back line. And if you see my Twitter, I retweeted some of his best moments versus the Red Bulls, and he was composed, and everything I've watched him for Fort Lauderdale, he brought it onto MLS, and he's a starter next year. I've got no words. I've seen enough from him to
let's be honest. He might be.
If they could sign him now, he would be starting over.
I'm really looking forward to Makun Mabika 2022.
Oh,
I'm getting excited about that.
that's gonna be so dominant. Makoun, he's just this dog who runs after everything. And Mabika, he's so composed and he's good on the ball. And either whether or not Miami play a back three or back four next year, those two they're gonna be very hard to get past. Just Mabika and his height alone, it intimidates attackers. So yeah, I forgot what the original point was. I was talking about FC Dallas, but yeah, Fort
Fort
Lauderdale.
Lauderdale needing
So
everything to break
yeah,
their way. I mean,
yeah.
this
So
is. I tweeted out that
that
like
4-4
it's a
game.
crazy. It's like a crazy scenario that they need to make it. It starts with them having to win everything remaining, and then they need about 6 things to break their way. It's very unlikely. That 4-4 game was nuts, and they were lucky to get away with a 4-4. I was thinking as I'm watching it, going back to our interview with Darren Powell, where he said, "Oh, I would like it to be 3-0," and here we are with a 4-4 match in the next match. And so, I just do you think it's possible? It's a pretty crazy scenario, but it still is technically possible for them.
I think they'll win their remaining games. I don't know if anything else will break their way, but yeah, that 4-4 game it was like Benny Hill music playing in the back. It was just so wide open. It was so wide open. Like
It could have been like
yeah.
6-6. It could have been like 8-8.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
there could have been more. It was just a crazy game. They definitely missed Mabika back there. I know Modesto Mendez and um Ethan Harden, his brother Drew scored, so that was cool. Ethan Harden and Modesto Mendez, they held it back there as best as they could, and they did a good job. But Fort Lauderdale, they're showing that they do miss that physicality and the calmness that Mabika brings. And yeah, I do think they'll win their remaining games. I'm just really excited to see Mitch Curry and Sean Hondal, get some like, potential MLS minutes next season because I've seen them and they're good players. They're good and they're well rounded, and I'm just really excited for some of the guys coming up from this team into Inter Miami next season.
Guys, as we close the show out, I do, as we're talking about the minor leagues and USL, give a quick shout out. Miami FC just 1 point away from clinching a playoff berth with 4 to play. So a very close margin for them, and we'll be sure to follow their playoff journey as they go through the USL Championship. But I wanted to close the show with the U.S. men's national team and talk about them for a sec and see what is going on there, because that Panama game felt like the disaster all over again. It felt like Trinidad and Tobago, and they also though are playing Costa Rica tonight and have the chance to go top of the table possibly if things break their way. It's so the margins are so razor thin for them right now. Austin, that U.S. men's national team felt a lot like Jurgen's U.S. men's national team, and it scared me a little.
I think that
I felt like I had
with
like PTSD with that game.
yeah, and it's a lot to do with the U.S. men's national team underestimating CONCACAF opponents, and I'm tired of it. And I am tired of Berhalter with this squad rotation from one game to the next. 7 different starters, I believe, and that didn't include the goalkeeper. So there are many different reasons why I absolutely hated having to witness that, and I hate that they, you know, are going to have to. They're probably going to struggle against Costa Rica. Let's be honest, but it's a game where you have to win at least by 2 goals when you're at home in Columbus. I am pretty worried to see what the starting lineup looks like and what Berhalter is going to do, because I'm tired of the Roldans, the Legets, and those. I mean, they don't. There's so much
But
quality
they've
now that
played well. They're not the problem. The problem
for me the
the
problem
Jets played
is
well.
I think that there's more quality than Leggett with De La Torre, with Weston McKennie, with Yunus Musa, with Tyler Adams. I can go on with a list of midfielders nonstop that the U.S. men's national team have. They have more quality right now than I think they've ever had, and they're all super young right? And they're now gaining the experience. But when you bring in, and I'm not against MLS guys playing for the men's national team. I think legit, I've even spoken to the guy when I had a radio show. I did an interview with him. I think he's an amazing guy and a good presence to have in a U.S. men's national team camp. With that said, going into 2022 and going into these qualifiers that are now becoming more crucial as you continue to drop points, I'm not sure if Lletget is the answer to the stagnant Berhalter midfield. I don't think that's my issue with it. And I think that he needs to explore more options. I want to see, I think there's another round of games in the next 4 weeks. There's so many international breaks leading up to the World Cup. I'm tired of this squad rotation, this camp rotation. You need to bring in the quality guys if they're fit and ready to play, because you have to start getting results. You cannot let teams like Panama, like Canada, like Costa Rica creep up on you in this octagonal where you lost out in 2017, right? And you cannot have that again. So I'm a little frustrated as a men's national team supporter, as a person who watches them and analyzes them. But this game against Costa Rica tonight at 7, as we record this on Wednesday, is going to be extremely crucial for what the camp looks like in November, what the table looks like in the octagonal, and how the U.S. men's national team are going to play going forward. I need to see a lot more from them. I think that says it all with my frustrations.
I'm just my only pushback that I'm going to say to you is that I was looking it up as you were talking. The 4 highest rated players from the Panama game were Kellen Acosta, who plays for Rapids, were Sebastian Lletget, who plays for Galaxy, was George Bello, who plays for Atlanta United, and Walker Zimmerman, who plays for Nashville. So the 4 highest rated players in the outfield were all MLS guys. It was all those international guys that weren't playing well.
Let me say this. I think that it has to do with, like I said, it's a stagnant midfield. So if they're able to possess the ball between Acosta and Lletget, then fine. I think Walker Zimmerman's really good, by the way. I am a huge Walker Zimmerman fan, even though I hate Nashville. I love Walker Zimmerman. I think he's good. George Bello has a lot of progression to do. He's young, but he's a very exciting talent. I like George Bello, although I do think Anthony Robinson is the left back for the future. It's just, I like George Bello as a prospect for depth. I think that's good. But the midfield, there's times where Kellen Acosta can be really good. And when you saw it in the Nations League or the Gold Cup, whatever it was, those 2 tournaments where he's this feisty player, they like to say CONCACAF-ing or whatever, what people have that against teams in these competitions. Kellen Acosta is a player.
But
sure,
we're not gonna be debating refereeing in this podcast, right?
No, not again. Anyway, not again.
We would never.
No, I think that's a fair point to bring up there, the highest rated, but I don't think that they created anything good in this match, and I think that the entire team as a whole. It's like finding a dime. What's the saying where you can shine against this team that wasn't good, but what is that really saying if you're not elevating them to the next level? Sure, you can be the best player on a bad team, but that does nothing. And that's kind of how I see those ratings. But like I said, I like Lletget as a person and what he's done. He played, I think, in 2020, 2019 was in every single camp. He still continued to be in every single camp. I mean, he lives and breathes for the U.S. men's national team, and that's great. But there are guys that need to start getting exposure now before they head into winter of 2022 because they're still young, still need experience, especially in CONCACAF, in order to compete if they get to the World Cup. Let me not jinx them.
Guys, we didn't really touch on Columbus Crew. Inter Miami is going to finish their road trip. We'll see if they can sort of pull and claw their way back into this, but we will touch on it. Hopefully this time next week and review that game before a very big double game week that they're going to have with Toronto and Cincinnati when they return back here to sunny South Florida. She is Alex Winley. He is Austin Robillard. I am Ian Hess for our producer, Andres. Thank you so much for joining us on the Heron Outlet. Make sure you subscribe the YouTube channel, the podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast, and we'll see you back here this time next week.